So, hi everyone. Welcome to today's Conversations and Connections session. Before we jump in, I want to take a moment just to maybe set the tone for how I think about these conversations and why we're spending time together in this space. AI continues to move quickly, faster than most organizations and honestly most individuals can fully absorb. This series isn't really meant to chase after tools or trends, but to try to help keep our collective mindset oriented toward change, growth, and thoughtful adaptation. These sessions are designed as places to slow things down so we can think through these concepts and ideas better. If there are new initiatives within the university community, those things will be obviously this is a place to discuss them, but we would always be able to share that out in other ways. Here, we're trying to notice patterns, to reflect how AI is reshaping not just the things that we do, but how we work, how we collaborate, and how we make decisions, both in higher education. And I think Rebecca's here today to give us a particular insight into how this is expanding into the broader workforce that we are preparing our students to enter. So today's conversation really fits that purpose perfectly. We're going to talk less about AI as a set of features and maybe more about AI as something that interacts with human systems, with meetings, with collaboration, attention, judgment, uh, organizational habits overall. That's where a lot of the real work of adoption happens, and it's where a lot of these tensions are showing up. Uh, my hope is that today you're not just going to be thinking about AI as something that's out there, but also about your own work in higher ed, your own teams, your own classrooms, not just student work, not just faculty work, but overall the business of higher education. And all those small design choices that can shape how people think and work. So this isn't about answers, but it is about starting to build the muscle of asking better questions as the shift continues. I want to also say I'm a little better lit than normal today because I'm on the University of Arizona's campus in Tucson, where it is very sunny. I'm spending the week in the Grand Challenges building, meeting with University of Arizona's chief AI officer, David Ebert, and his team. He has a staff here working to enact change at the university level, at the institutional level, doing amazing work. And I'm really excited to be out here with them, working through different areas of the overall institutional roadmap. Yeah, so it's pretty nice to have left behind 2 feet of snow and 20-degree temperatures. Also, I live a little south of Syracuse, New York. If you're familiar with upstate New York, it's mostly in a valley. We get about 3 days of sun a year, and so it's pretty nice to be walking around in shirt sleeves and sunglasses, as my dear departed dad would say. So it's a great time to be out here, mingling with the cacti and also some of my amazing colleagues here on the campus. We're getting a lot of things figured out. We're having a lot of fun doing it. So it's just been a really great opportunity and really great experience. But with all that in mind, I want to introduce today's guest. Rebecca Hinds is here. She's an organizational behavior expert and leading authority on the future of work. She has helped dozens of organizations across industries and continents fix their dysfunctional meetings, improve team collaboration, and leverage AI and other technology to drive real business results. In 2025, she founded the Work AI Institute at Glean to conduct cutting-edge research on how AI is transforming work and to help leaders adapt. You might have read about her before or read her words. You might have seen her as a talking head because she's all over the place. Harvard Business Review, Time, the New York Times, CNBC, Bloomberg, Fast Company, Forbes. She's everywhere, but she's got a brand new book coming out literally in a matter of weeks called Your Best Meeting Ever. It's fantastic. It's exciting. And I'm really excited to have Rebecca here. Thank you for making time to talk with us.
Thanks so much, Nate. I'm really glad to be here, and I'm such a fan of the work you do and the intentionality you approach it with. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, so let's jump in. We're gonna the way these normally work is I've got some questions I wanna run through. We're gonna get Rebecca's insights. Hopefully, we'll have a little time for community conversation at the end. If people have questions, please feel free to at any point type things into the chat. I ask that you not come off mute. We'll try to make sure to have time for that at the end. But I've got an amazing tech team, more than a tech team. I've got an amazing family standing by behind the scenes who are going to capture questions. We'll make sure to try to get to those toward the end too. So, Rebecca, you have suggested that AI training works best when it goes beyond technical skills. You've talked about organizing AI readiness around something that you call the 5 C's. I heard you talk about this at a different event, and it just really struck me. The 5 C's: comprehension, concerns, collaboration, context, and calibration. So, for folks who are just getting oriented to this, can you maybe walk us through that framework a little bit? Explain why it's been so effective in making AI adoption feel more human, more workable inside of organizations?
Sure. So this was a framework we developed at Asana, my colleagues and I, and what we were seeing consistently, and we see it arguably more pervasively now than ever before, is so often AI literacy and fluency is treated as a checkbox item, and there's an overwhelming focus. If there is focus, there's an overwhelming focus on those core aspects of learning how to use the technology, prompt engineering, prompt design, building agents. And when we think about AI transformation, we know that so much of the breakdown, so much of the failure we're seeing across the board is due to the human aspect. It's not often due to the fact that employees don't know how to use the technology. That's an important component, but when we see the breakdowns, it often goes beyond the literacy. And so the first C in this framework, comprehension, is about the literacy. We know that that is important, understanding the fundamentals of how to prompt, how to build agents, very important, but definitely not sufficient. The second C is around concerns. And in every organization, every employee has some level of concern related to AI. What's fascinating is depending on the maturity of the organization, the concerns differ and evolve over time. So, what we see in less mature organizations, a lot of the concern relates to human fear, fear of being replaced, displaced, skepticism in terms of the technology, hallucinations. As we see more maturity and more of that holistic training and learning and development, we see the concern shift more to around ethics, privacy, ethical use in decision making in particular. Interpretability is a big one, being able to understand where the decision or where the recommendation has come from. And so it's important that every organization have a sense of what are those concerns that are top of mind for my students, my employees, because that should then impact how you think about the change process. The third C is collaboration. This is one that I'm especially passionate about. What we know is that relationship between humans and AI and how students, employees, workers are framing that relationship matters deeply in terms of how effective they are in using the technology. And in particular, what we're seeing is when people approach AI with the mindset of it's a teammate versus it's a transactional tool, they're interacting with the technology in fundamentally different ways. They're recognizing the technology isn't perfect. They're iterating with it. They're not asking, what can this technology give to me or do for me? They're asking, what can I do with the technology? It's making them more productive. It's making them more enthusiastic about the technology, and it's making them more deliberate and intentional about how they use the technology. And so when we think about understanding our workforce, understanding those mental models that employees, workers, students are approaching the technology matters as well. The fourth C is context. So the organizational context. Policies, principles, governance, all of these things are important. They're important to minimize risk and uncertainty. They also give employees a lot of clarity. And what we see is perhaps counterintuitively more experimentation in environments where there's clear guardrails and clear policies because workers, students aren't as hesitant to make mistakes if they know what the guardrails are. And then fifth, which is another one I'm deeply passionate about and see go wrong a lot of the time is calibration. So, how are we measuring the success of our AI efforts? Right now, we're seeing an over-index on output as opposed to real business organizational outcomes. And that again incentivizes different types of behaviors. So thinking carefully about what are those metrics we're measuring, incentivizing employees to optimize for, and how does that change how they then interact and approach the technology?
It almost seems like, I mean, you probably did this intentionally. It seems like that's an order, that's a flow, right? I mean, these aren't just five concepts. You benefit by going through it in those stages in that order. Is that kind of what the intention is?
Often organizations will go through it in that order. What we're seeing now is, and often, you've done one and it's hard to go back, but in the best cases, you have a policy, you have a measurement system from day one, because we know that that is important to then, cater your training, cater your learning around. If policy is an afterthought, it tends to be an afterthought in the minds of workers and employees as well. So, in the best cases, you think about recognizing these things can be living and breathing, especially when we think about policy, and they should be. But ideally, you have all of them in place from a pretty early stage.
Which is so difficult, right? If your
Hmm.
mindset is on the comprehension stage, or you're working on understanding what even those concerns are or how the tools even work, hard to really know what those guardrails should look like or will look like. So I guess that flexibility is key, right? The fact that it is a living system.
And I see some great comments in the chat. If you're unsure about what those guardrails should be, ideally there should be some that are led by an IT team, around safe and ethical use of the technology. But solicit this feedback from employees, workers, students, because they'll have a good sense in terms of what they're comfortable with or what they're grappling with and want guidance around. When should I be using AI? How should I be thinking about these ambiguous cases? What is my role as a human? Who is accountable for decisions? All of these things, again, they can be living and breathing, but help give people that permission to experiment in a healthy way because we know that experimentation right now is the number one mechanism through which people are learning how to use the technology. And so it's something that we should explicitly give guidance and guardrails around to encourage that healthy, safe experimentation.
It's so challenging, I think, I mean, I don't want to get hung up too much on the guardrail side of this because there's a lot of other great stuff to get into, but I feel like that's a particular challenge. It's top of mind for me because I'm sitting here, in day two of 3 days of conversations with people here on campus, and a lot of great minds, a lot of good people in the room, and we don't have that yet, right? We don't have anything explicit on paper. Part of it is because there is that technological side, IT gets involved. Part of it
Mhm.
is that there is a governance side with a lot of voices. But I think it's just one of those things where until you really kind of internalize the sense that we're going to get this wrong. We're going to put this on paper. It's going to be wrong. It's going to be out of date by the time it gets up on the website. Until you are okay with that, I think it becomes really difficult to start to put names on these things, to label this. I mean, to get to that point.
Yes, and it's my mentor, Bob Sutton, will often say, it's important for organizations to identify what is that place for failure and recognize, Stanford, for example, I spent a lot of time with, they've developed AI sandboxing environments for students, for staff, for employees, for faculty, in terms of this is a sandboxed environment where we're going to give you access to a whole bunch of different AI tools in a secure environment. Now, when you go outside that sandbox environment, the guardrails are different because the risk is high, but having a dedicated space for failure to try to push the boundaries is really important.
We're getting there. I think one of the things I just heard about is that we have developed sandbox spaces for faculty and students. They're not rolled out yet, but they're coming soon. I heard even maybe potentially as early as the end of next month. And so we'll be
Mhm.
sharing that out once we know more about that. And I think it's a really powerful tool to play around because that experimentation that we're talking about, I think, is part of what leads to infrastructure, right? Like until we know what's possible, we don't know what we really want. And I think that kind of leads me to something I heard you talk about again another webinar where I was watching you speak, and you said something about how AI doesn't need to be right to be useful. I think that
Mhm.
really it struck me because I'm somebody who I don't mind being wrong. I don't mind failing in public. I don't mind people seeing me trip because I feel like that's how I grow. That's how I learn. And I think AI is one of those situations where we're sort of hung up on this sense of, well, it's supposed to be right, or it's telling us the answer, or it's wrong, and look, that's a problem. It's a really powerful reframing of this. AI doesn't need to be right to be useful. So there's
Mhm.
value even when the output is imperfect. I wonder, maybe could you talk about that a little bit, maybe even as a mindset shift, and what does that mean for how we might use AI if it doesn't need to be right to still help us?
Sure, and I want to come back just quickly to the sandbox discussion, because in many ways I also mean that to be metaphorical in the sense of having safe spaces, even something a forum like this, for example, where hopefully folks are encouraged to ask questions, push boundaries, having, Fridays if you're leading a class devoted to pushing the boundaries, using AI in ways that might not be permissible the other days of the week. I think those types of sandbox environments, even if they're not, technically sandboxes, can also be important in fostering these creative pursuits and experimentation around the technology. And relatedly, this idea of AI doesn't need to be right to be useful. It's not the same as accuracy doesn't matter, right? We know that accuracy matters. These technologies are fundamentally flawed. They're probabilistic. They're not deterministic. They'll always give you a likely answer, not a guaranteed one. And that absolutely needs to be part of our mental model. But what we're seeing, and this is especially true in creative pursuits, is having AI act as a devil's advocate or push your thinking in a new way. Now, it differs pursuit by pursuit, role by role. But we know that having AI inject diversity of ideas or different perspectives or specific stakeholder views can be enormously effective, not just in getting people out of that groupthink mentality, but also leaving them more satisfied with the outcome of the decision because they've investigated more different perspectives as part of that final decision-making process. And so, in a meeting forum in particular, especially if you're in a forum where your group meets together, often you don't bring in outside voices, or outside voices are difficult um, to bring into the meeting. You want to represent the student voice, for example, and you're not able to fully do that. All of these things can be enormously valuable in terms of AI playing that role and injecting some different perspective into a meeting format or into a another collaborative format.
So when we're playing around with AI and it spits back something wildly ridiculous or off topic or just plain wrong and we know it, that's not a reason to point at the screen and say, "Oh, look, AI is bad." It's a chance to reflect, develop, to find other ways to have that sort of pressure test our own ideas.
Yes, and there's a difference between being right and wrong
Mhm.
objectively and something that might be correct but doesn't align with your mental model and thinking. And I think recognizing that as well, is the technology fundamentally inaccurate, in which case we should be digging deeper. We should understand, okay, why is that the case? We should be trying to correct next time. But if it's something that could objectively be right or wrong, and perhaps it just doesn't align with our line of thinking, then that can be, very healthy and encouraging us to adopt a more expansive mindset and perspective.
I feel like, that idea of AI as a thinking partner, we think about that a lot in terms of helping us to develop and build our ideas, but sometimes that comes through opposition, through,
Mhm.
like you're saying, this diversity of experience, range of voices, range of perspectives. I think that's something that AI can do really well for us.
One of my favorite use cases is I'll often work with organizations to run pre-mortems. So there's a lot of evidence to suggest that doing a pre-mortem before you launch a new program, launch a new project, launch a new initiative, that is very successful in increasing risk forecasting up to 30%. We forecast risks better. And so having AI play that role of what risks, imagine the project, the program, the class, the semester has failed. It's 6 months in the future. What did we do wrong? Having AI give you opinions, perspectives, as long as it knows enough context about your organization, in the best case it does, that can also be so helpful in letting you, allowing you, enabling you to course correct before the failure exists in real time.
I mean, as we use these tools more, they become embedded in our meetings, they become embedded in our collaboration, our workflows. I mean, it sounds like there's a real benefit here, but it's also tempting to then assume that this is going to solve everything. But you've argued the opposite. I've heard you say, and I've read in your book that you say that tech isn't the fix. It isn't always the fix. So what goes wrong when organizations or even just people rely on these tools without redesigning for how work actually gets done, how people actually work and collaborate together?
It's human. It's humans, and technology rarely fails because technology isn't powerful enough, and we've seen this for decades. It fails because humans resist change. And when we think about technology, often from a research perspective, we'll call it socio-technical systems, right? They're not just technical systems, they're deeply ingrained and influenced by the social context. And so, what we're seeing now with AI, again, is so much of the failure, so much of the resistance to change isn't because the technology doesn't work. Fundamentally, it's because of human resistance. Technology is not deterministic. And especially when we think about AI, so much complexity, so many different malleable ways we can use the technology. AI is not going to inherently make our organizations better or make our organizations worse. It's about our intentionality in bringing the technology into our workforces. And one of the biggest, you know, things I'm seeing in practice is if employees are approaching the technology as more of a teammate, as this is something that is going to augment my human capabilities, they're interacting with it fundamentally differently than the employee or the student or the worker who's saying, I'm going to use this technology to cognitively offload the things that I should be doing as humans. That's where we see the biggest difference. It's what is that mental model? How are people approaching the technology? Is it in service of their human skills, or is it something that they're using to cognitively offload the hard work? And in the latter case, that's where we see that the negative impacts pretty quickly spiral because that's contagious. It's contagious on other people when you're using the technology to dump friction onto other people, that can quickly spiral into organizational devastation when we think about how this technology is implemented.
Organizational devastation. I like that. I mean, I don't like it. I don't want that to happen, but I like the thinking of these terms and thinking of the consequences of some of these things in that scale. I think really helps to recenter all of this on the human, on judgment. It makes the process of that, the intention of this usage, so much more foregrounded, right? I mean, so many
Mm.
times we don't necessarily reflect or do a pre-mortem or think about the work that we're doing in terms of breaking it down into not only steps, but also what's our North Star? What's the thing that's important that
Yeah.
we want to do? What's the thing that it's okay to load off based
Hmm.
on our own compass? I mean, I think this is challenging us to kind of rethink how we work, not with the tool, but because of it. And that's giving us an opportunity. I think that's really valuable.
And that's one of the most important determinations I think we can all make as individuals, as teams, as organizations is what does that division of labor look like between humans and AI? And be explicit about that. And I'm seeing the best successes come from people in particular, sometimes teams, but in general, people who have set hard guardrails for themselves in terms of when they'll use AI. And this is especially important in some of the creative pursuits where there's this narrative right now, and I've sort of alluded to how it can be healthy around AI allowing you to overcome what's sometimes called the blank page effect. And in many pursuits, that can be enormously helpful in terms of generating ideas. But in certain cases, and I've seen this in particular with a colleague in student teams, if you're injecting AI too early into the creative process, inevitably you're going to feel less ownership and less accountability over those ideas. You're going to be less likely to wrestle with them when there's pushback. And so also thinking about, if you're in certain creative pursuits, perhaps you want to set a guardrail yourself in terms of, I'm not going to use AI for the first, you know, an hour of brainstorming, or I'm not going to use AI in this specific part of the design thinking process. Those boundaries can be really helpful. And especially as we see more and more pressure to inject AI into every aspect of work, understanding where you're clear on in terms of those boundaries can help you resist some of this temptation to use AI for everything, even the things that probably shouldn't be AI enabled right now.
Right. Or don't have to be, right? I mean, that idea of the first draft in a flash, I hear that a lot, and
Mhm.
I can understand the usefulness of that. But it does feel like it's too tempting, or it's like our functional fixedness kicks in, and we see the draft and we think, okay, I'm going to move some words around, but I'm not going to fundamentally alter the concepts. And I think that's really important in creative endeavors, but also, I mean, in almost anything,
Mhm.
don't get a first draft in a flash, get a first draft that you sweated over, that tortured you, and then potentially hone it from there.
And this is why metrics become so important as well, because, and this is less true in academic organizations than other organizations, but the default reaction is to optimize for efficiency. And so, yes, if you're optimizing for speed, if you're encouraging your employees to, move through work faster, you're going to incentivize these behaviors that are often unhealthy versus if you incentivize both for efficiency and the quality of work teamwork and organizational outcomes, you're incentivizing different behaviors that enable and encourage these types of healthy guardrails.
I mean, the incentivization piece, I think, is huge, and I think it's something that higher ed inherently is bad at. I mean, I don't know. I'm just going to say it. I hope no one throws tomatoes at the screen. I hope my boss isn't here. But we don't have piles of cash the way some businesses do, and so incentivizing it in terms of money, of a stipend, of a bonus, that's something that's not really open to us. But there are other ways to incentivize that, and I feel like some of that comes from just sharing the work that's being done, showing that it's important, letting people know that you value that. It's again, it's just going back to it's a really interesting time because I think AI, not even about AI, it's an example of a lever that's causing us to have to rethink our values and consider differently how we live those. We talk about living our values, but I mean day to day in our meetings, in our work, in our interactions. Uh, yeah, it's sort of mind blowing when you think about. It seems like it's AI, but it's not. It's a change. It's a change, and that's the situation, right?
Absolutely. And I want to pick up on this great comment from Diana in the chat because it's so insightful, and it's definitely the case where there are certainly some parts of all of our roles and jobs that should be cognitively offloaded to the AI. All of those mundane things, the scheduling of meetings, often the transcribing of meetings, the coordination tasks that we face as workers, all of these things can and should be offloaded to AI. But again, that division of labor in terms of what should be versus what shouldn't be cognitively offloaded is really important. And picking up on the incentive piece again, even in industry and more, more dollars and cents organizations, we're not seeing financial incentives move the needle as much as other incentives. We are seeing, if you're looking at a sales team who is, for example, already incentivized through quotas and that type of compensation, but so much of it is, the peer recognition, the baking it into performance reviews, making it explicit, prizes, meetings with certain highly influential people within the organization, being brought into the decision-making process in terms of what tools and AI solutions we invest in. All of these things can be significantly more impactful in terms of encouraging the right behaviors than the financial incentives.
I mean, and that goes back to culture, right? I mean, you're talking about a creating a culture that allows this experimentation, not just allows, but rewards it in some
Mhm.
types of visible ways. So again, it's not tech, it's people, it's humans, it's culture.
And I'll say one more thing that is related to this conversation that I think is important is what we see in so many cases is, and there was a fascinating study done pretty recently with Y Combinator companies and how about 40% of the ideas and business plans they're building are aimed at work that people don't want to be automated. And so what we're seeing, and I think this is less true in academia than other industries, but I've seen it in everywhere, is don't automate things that even if the AI can objectively do the thing, it's intrinsically motivating to the student or the worker. Or if you decide that that aspect of work should be automated, make sure that you're replacing it with something that gives employees, students, workers as much meaning, because that intrinsic motivation is so important right now. And so I'm seeing, unfortunately, a lot of instances of organizations automating aspects of work that people feel intrinsically motivated around. And that can also be a real danger, even if the technology can objectively do the thing, do the task.
So mindful integration, a mindful, slow roadmap to all of this, I think is kind of the key to some of what we're talking about here.
And sometimes you have to ask employees too, or workers. It's not something that we necessarily understand as leaders, as as instructors, as teachers. Sometimes it's worth the conversation. Often it is worth the conversation or the survey in terms of, what are those parts of work that you do find deeply personally meaningful, and making sure you're automating around that, not aimed at that.
I mean, we're higher ed workers, all of us. I mean, I would imagine all of us in the room, we're faculty, we're staff, we're in the industry of higher ed, if we can call it that. And we're thinking, we want our leaders to ask us these questions. We want this visible, but we also have that opportunity in the classroom. If we're classroom faculty, we can ask our students, what do you want? How do you want this tool to be used? And we, of course, we have ideas about that too, right? Because we're the competency experts, we're the teacher, but it gives us an opportunity to have an open dialogue about it that can really surface some interesting perspectives from students, but also give us better insight into what those students are thinking about how this affects their not just their work, but their relationship to the competency, to the discipline of learning.
Exactly. Yeah.
I want to talk about your book a little bit. So the book is called Your Best Meeting Ever, coming out in a few weeks. Is that right, Rebecca?
I think 3 weeks today.
It's exciting. Are you nervous? Are you scared?
I was nervous. I think I believe in it deeply, and in many ways, I wrote it for the people who I've worked with over the years, and in many ways myself. And I think the reception so far has been so positive that I'm more excited than nervous, but definitely the combination of the two.
It's got a really cheerful cover, and it's got a sassy title, but it's so deep. I mean, there a lot of the concepts you talk about, and you have a QR code or a slide. Could you pull that up? People are asking for a link. We can make sure to share this out later, but this may be a quick way if you've got your phone handy to grab some information about it too. Um,
So I have the QR code here. There's my friends at Porchlight have some pre-order campaigns going on, so that'll take you to a discounted um, version of the book. But it's about meetings. It's also about more than meetings, and it's fundamentally about how do we rethink our collaboration systems within our organizations, and that includes AI. So the last chapter of the book in particular is all about how do we think about bringing AI into collaborative settings and what are the different roles AI can and should play. And a lot of the conversation today around how do you think about guardrails. Certainly, we don't want people sending their AI digital twins to their meetings instead of showing up themselves, right? That's a classic example that unfortunately we're seeing in so many cases that cognitive offloading of the human to human interaction is something that, I worry a lot about in terms of how our meetings are evolving.
when I start a meeting and the first five attendees are Otter or Reed, like it's demoralizing unless the person's also there. And so it changes things a little bit. But I gotta say, there's probably no two words that higher ed people like to hear more than discounted book. So I think you got everyone's attention when you talked about the QR code there. I think and I can vouch. I mean, I've read it, marked it up. uh, there's a lot to learn there. You talk about meetings as a product that needs
Mhm.
design. It was a really great way to think about it. I'd never really considered meetings are one of the things that we're doing. It's an investment. And you outline those seven principles that help people to rethink how collaboration can really work. I don't want you to give away all the goodies in the store, but as we start to think about this, can you maybe walk through some of those principles, maybe at a pretty high level? You don't have to go into too much detail. Again, I don't want to give away all the best parts, but maybe just some of the principles that maybe seem more resonant to you, some examples of how that shows up.
So the premise exactly is that meetings are the most important product in our entire organization. When we think about the time we invest, the cognitive capacity we invest, there's nothing we spend more of our time on in general in organizations than meetings of some shape or form. And yet they're the least optimized. And so as I've worked with organizations over the years, I've realized that the fundamental shift we need to make is becoming more intentional about how we schedule meetings, how we design meetings, just as we would a product that we sell to customers or a service we develop for customers. And so each of the seven chapters of the book walks through a product design principle applied to meetings. So the first one, for example, is cut your meeting debt. So just as we have technical debt in our products, we have meeting debt in our calendars. We have legacy meetings. We have a lot of committee meetings I see in the academic setting that often outlive the programs or projects or initiatives they're meant to support. How do you go about resetting your calendar, starting from scratch in many cases? And how do you give people permission and built-in excuses to decline or remove meetings from their calendar, given we know that so much of meetings are social contracts? We feel obliged to show up. We feel guilty when we cancel the meetings. We talked about metrics today. There's a whole chapter on how do you measure meetings? How do you ensure that the meetings you attend or run are effective and good investments of time? There's a chapter on rhythm. We often don't think about the rhythm of our work. We talked about the pre-mortem. I talk in the book about why that's so important at specific rhythms of projects and teams. The halfway point is another really fascinating one. The research is fascinating in terms of if you have a project that lasts 6 days versus 6 weeks versus 6 months, at the midpoint, regardless of the length of the project, there's this weird psychological trigger that happens because it's the moment that abundance turns to scarcity. You've used up half the time. And so taking advantage of that natural burst of energy and scheduling a meeting exactly at the halfway point from the start of the project or program or initiative to the deadline, if there is a deadline, can again be a healthy way to leverage rhythm to create and design better meetings. We talked about technology as the last chapter. Um, so those are some of the principles that I unpack in the book.
I feel like as I was reading the book, I found myself nodding constantly over some of the hilarious missteps, not so hilarious when they're happening, right? But the things that are happening in bad meetings. And I was thinking, I'm like, boy, you know what we really need is a bingo card. You should take the seven principles, turn it into like a promo item, a bingo card. We could all sit around and be like, oh, here he is going over again, or well, here he is starting the meeting late. I mean, I feel like those are things we can all relate to, and so there's a lot of relatable. I mean, I don't want to say humor, but there's a lot of relatable moments that even in higher ed, we have a ton of meetings. All of us are back to back to back a lot of times in these meetings. It's a very different culture of meetings of collaboration than it might be in industry, but it's still something that we really have to struggle and deal with because I feel like one of those tensions is between that feeling that the meeting is not work. It's
Mhm.
keeping me from the work. And so, are there ways or insights into, I mean, is that something that I'm doing wrong? Do I need to think differently? Or are there ways to make meetings more of an actionable, collaborative space where work actually gets done in the moment as opposed to the thing you're trying to fit in between all the meetings?
And that's at the core of the book, the idea that meetings should absolutely be aimed at moving work forward. Now, the goal isn't efficiency above all else, and I talk a lot about, the importance of injecting delight into meetings and how important that is in terms of making the meeting memorable. But meetings should be moving work forward. And the key problem we often see is meetings being used for purposes and efforts that should be happening asynchronously outside of the meeting. And so in the book, I outline what I call the 4D CEO test, which is essentially a two-part test to decide whether a meeting should exist. The first part of the test is a meeting should only exist if the purpose is to decide, discuss, develop, or debate, develop yourself or other people. Anything beyond that doesn't justify a meeting. And so that's how we learn to move status updates outside the meeting to asynchronous, the boss briefings, the briefings to your higher ups or your direct reports or information exchange type things shouldn't be happening in a live meeting. They should be happening asynchronously.
Can this be an email is a good question to ask ourselves.
Yeah.
I like that the D of develop because when you apply a system, I mean I have to say I'm a liberal arts guy. I'm a creative guy. And when we start to apply these systems to things, I start to wonder how draconian we're being. What about people? What about relationships? But that third D, the develop, you're talking about developing yourself, not just in terms of, or developing others, not just in terms of like what you might be learning, but it's also really relational.
It's huge. And this is in our AI era, this is where I see the cuts happen, where really this is the space we need to invest more time and effort into. And I was very deliberate about making sure that that develop was explicit in the 4D test because the whole purpose of the book, the whole purpose of making our meetings more efficient is to free up time for the aspects of work, the aspects of life that shouldn't be highly efficient. And meetings, developing your team, developing other people, developing yourself, this has never been more important. And we're seeing a narrative right now in particular about do we really need one-on-one meetings with our higher ups or our direct reports? the research is overwhelming that that is the most important practice a manager or a higher up can be leading and continuing with their people. We can't afford to be cutting those critical relationship building moments and meetings in service of efficiency.
But maybe the reason people are looking at those is because they so often go off the rails, right? You show up for your one-on-one and nobody knows what they're going to talk about. I mean, that's another concept you talk about in the book. You've got to have a reason.
And usually what we see is so there are two people that tend to leave meetings most satisfied, and this is great research from my colleague Stephen Rogelberg. The two people who tend to leave the meeting most satisfied are the organizer, and that's what we often see in one-on-ones, right? The higher up leads the agenda. It should be the reverse in almost all cases, or you should compare, you bring together both agendas and compare whether there's misalignment, because that's also dangerous if there's no overlap in the topics to be discussed. The other person is the person who talks the most. And so thinking about, how do we create meetings? One of the chapters, one of the principles is user-centric design, designing the meeting such that the attendee's time is more valuable than yours, and thinking very carefully about how do you design the aspects, the design of the meeting so that the attendees walk out having invested their time well as opposed to wasted it. That's another key hallmark of great meetings.
When I was reading that section, through the eyes of a teacher, I was thinking, oh, that's how my class should run. This isn't about me. This isn't about my knowledge or what I've learned or what I'm trying to impart. This is about what the students need in these individual moments. So we're talking about meetings, we're talking about collaboration, but it's also something that we can directly translate to if we're an advisor dealing with our students, if we're a faculty member in the classroom. These are insights that we can, without much of a lift, we can translate them pretty easily into different areas of work.
And the organizer, the leader, the facilitator, the faculty member should always have the final call and make that determination. But absolutely, in the best cases, it's informed by the attendees, the people in the room.
So I mean, this will be maybe the last formal question because I know we're getting a couple of questions through the chat as well. But I think one thing that really helped me translate some of the ideas in the book, because I'm a teacher teaching students for the workforce, but I work too. I'm in the workforce. Higher education is a space it's a workplace, but it's a
Mhm.
place that prepares people for work. So I guess I'm just wondering, from your perspective, are there habits or skills around collaboration and decision making that are more important than ever now that we're in our AI era, as you and Taylor have mentioned?
Well, I'm biased in just how important I think running a good meeting is, or being able to show up as a designer of a meeting. And I make the point in the book that everyone, regardless of whether you're the organizer, is a co-designer of better meetings. And I unpack several strategies. If you're not the most powerful person in the room, if you don't have the highest status in the room, there are still tips and tricks and strategies you can use to push back on ineffective, dysfunctional meetings. But I see collaboration right now, increasingly collaboration with AI in addition to humans, understanding how to do that well, how to explicitly define the division of labor, how to explicitly measure healthy collaboration. That's going to be a competitive advantage for organizations, but also individuals. And I often say and see in practice all the time, if you are, especially if we think about students, if they're entering the workforce for the first time and they can run an effective meeting or guide a meeting back on track, that is such a differentiator right now. And the natural conclusion folks make is, oh, wow, they can run a meeting, they can probably lead a project or they can probably lead a team. Maybe they can lead a department eventually. Whereas the reverse is also true. If you go in, to the workforce, you can't lead a meeting, you don't know how to show up for a meeting effectively. The natural conclusion is you're not yet ready to run that project or that team. And so it has this halo effect or the opposite that I think can be very powerful in both directions.
I, I don't want to put you on the spot too much. I'm going to try to weave together a couple of comments I'm seeing here. Joanna is asking about a tool for information gathering, asking of questions, trying to figure out how to set an agenda before a meeting to make it the most effective. But other people are commenting, yeah, and not email because we get enough of emails. And what happens when people don't read those emails? So, I mean, how do we really embrace this shift then if we're in a culture, and I don't think we're unique, where emails sometimes get ignored uh, or not acted upon quickly enough to then really inform the design of the meeting or the system or the situation that we want to try to present. I mean, basically, fix everything, Rebecca. What's the answer?
Well, I certainly don't have a silver bullet, but one of the most important things organizations can do is explicitly define what are our communication tools that we're using as an organization, ideally, if not as a team, and what is the purpose of each of those tools. One of those tools should be explicit for coordination. Who is doing what by when and how? Several tools can help with this. It can be, if you have a culture around Google Docs, that can be effective. Perhaps you pair it with a Slack notification before the meeting and you use multiple different technologies. I'm biased. I worked at Asana for 7 years. So, I saw enormous positive impact when you use Asana for the meeting agendas. Everyone's, very clear on what is the source of truth. And when you have action items, they're all baked into the platform. The most important thing, regardless of tool, is you have that clarity in terms of what is the source of truth, what are the expectations, and you can start to then set hard guardrails in terms of, okay, once people know that the 4D rule must be followed, once people know that in certain meetings, if there's not an agenda, the meeting's not going to happen, those types of guardrails baked into the system also carry this 1-2 punch.
Does that have to start at the top? I mean, when you talk about sending out clear communication signals, this is going to be for this is going to be for that. I immediately look up. But are there is it all on the bigwigs to call the shots?
So we did a fascinating study a couple years ago now. We took a group of employees from Asana as well as Amazon, and we essentially asked them to stop using half of their collaboration tools for a period of 2 weeks. We know that in every setting, people are just using too many collaboration tools, such that in large organizations, enterprises, workers can be switching between tabs and tools 1,200 times per day. It's enormous. Sometimes the context switch cost is more than 23 minutes to return back to the original task. So we asked them to stop using half those tools for a period of 2 weeks. And we measured something called digital exhaustion, which is essentially how exhausted do people feel as a result of the technologies they feel they need to use to collaborate. Now, there was good news and there was bad news at the end of this 2 week period. And perhaps we'll send around the article where we describe the findings. The good news was after just 2 weeks, more than half of people said, my tech stack, my collaboration stack can be leaner. I don't need all these tools. There are one or two tools I can remove permanently. But that digital exhaustion, and this was the bad news, that actually increased through the study. And what we realized was happening was people now realized there was a better way. They realized there was a solution. They could use fewer tools. They didn't need to use Zoom, WebEx, and Teams all at once. They could pick one. But they also realized that they alone could not fully make that determination because so much of our technology use, so much of our meeting engagement is interdependent on other people. And so that recognition that, wow, there's a solution to this. I don't have to, it's sometimes called learned helplessness, right? There's a better way. I don't have to succumb to all of this exhaustion. That was both enlightening and more exhausting that they alone could not fix the problem. So, yes, that's a long way of saying, yes, ideally it happens at the leadership level. But if that's not possible, and in particular in large universities, it's often not possible, the more you can do it at the department level, at the division level, the higher up you go, the more effective it's going to be in reducing those exceptions.
I'm probably not the only one in the room who has meetings this week that are on Zoom, also meetings that are in Teams, and also meetings that are here in a conference room. I mean, it just brings home the fact that all of these things, all these decisions, everything we've been talking about today, there's a cost, there's benefits, and kind of navigating all of that is some of the great work that you and your colleagues have done over the years. And I just can't recommend this book enough. And your insights have always been really helpful to me in thinking about AI as a change, AI as a tool, but also AI for how it impacts an organization. I mean, and really understanding that is something that I think has been really important to my thinking. And I think your book does a good job of showing how that translates to a lot of different settings. So, I mean, I'm really grateful for the conversation today. I'm grateful for your time. Grateful for everybody joining us here today. Hopefully, we covered some questions, covered some answers. Uh, can't encourage you enough to pick up Rebecca's book. Rebecca, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for coming. I'm such a fan of what's going on at the University of Arizona broadly, and if I can be helpful in any way, please reach out.
Oh, I mean, I'm gonna ping you right now as soon as we hang up here. Thank you again so much, and to everybody, we'll get this recording sent out. It'll be online relatively soon, but we'll get it sent out along with any other additional links and things. And yeah, thank you again, and this has been terrific.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, everyone.